start making, Red Bull was cutting up some donuts, a lot of colas, so we got whiskey colas. So I'm going to start making those back here, and you guys are welcome to
try and stay focused.
You do not want to mess up the board.
Yeah, so I'll try and make it as basic and easy as possible, but at the same time, if anyone wants some more, tell them more. So I'll go through the basics. This is a perfect candidate for a wax. So it's a perfect example of, you know, pretty decent wax in the middle, but nothing on the edges, and that's, you know, pretty good. That means you're riding on your edges. A lot of people are sliding on their edges, not riding on their edges. So, but basically the first thing with like a full wax and tune is basically taking everything down and getting it dull. If you were to run your nail across this, it's really rough. It kind of makes it sort of jagged. The best thing for that is basically a stone and a gummy stick. So basically the stone will just take everything off. And like a lot of riders, pro or amateur, will carry one of these with them sometimes, basically just to take a burr off. So if you ever catch a rock and you're in the backcountry, you're hiking stuff, it really sucks if you get a burr because it won't go away. And so you can hear it, like how jagged it is when it's taking off. And you can get it from anything, it's from hitting rails, whatever, but it's kind of the first part of making everything smooth. The whole idea between waxing the board and everything is basically how smooth and how fast can you make the board go. So any snags is going to make it sort of rough as far as gliding and stuff. So the first thing to do is that. The gummy though is really soft and it just takes off like residue. So it's a lot squishier, it breaks up really easily. And you kind of, it's basically like sandpaper, so it's more like polishing the edge and taking everything off. So typically we try and take as much stuff off as possible. If it's going on the grinder, then the grinder does that work for us. We don't really have to do anything. But if you're waxing at home, you know, this is definitely an awesome tool to have. Taking it a step further is a diamond file. The diamond file works best when it's wet.
There's water right here.
You can use beer, you can spit on it, you can do whatever you want. Basically, once it's wet, it will glide over really quick. So,
you start out with different grades of diamond files?
For the most part, this blue one's good. You can definitely buy every grade, and that's how they sell you on more stuff. But whether you really need it, pretty doubtable unless you're like, you know, in some Olympic race. But if you're in an Olympic race, you probably have a random color too. So I just use my hand as a file, so I'm kind of using my knuckles as a guide, and I'm just running down the board. If you really want to get even more tech with this, you always go one direction. So that would be tip to tail in most cases because you're always riding that way. So what really was making a lot of noise 2 minutes ago isn't really making much noise because I took most of the big burrs off with a stone, rubbed down any kind of varnish stuff with that, and then took it down with this. So once this gets like pretty smooth, I'm pretty much ready to like file the board down.
Can you do it too much? I was worried about doing it too much.
Honestly, you'd have to have a lot of strength to do any damage with this. This thing, definitely not. And this guy, yes, to a certain extent, but it's meant to divot. So you end up with these channels in it. So you really couldn't do that too much. However, you could take like a Panzer file or a diamond file, like a bigger size file, like one of these guys, and you could definitely damage your board. So you could take a lot more out of it. And so a lot of the guys, especially guys who ride a lot of rails, will actually just take the edge off the board, brand new out of the wrapper. I don't need my edges because I don't want to hang up. You know. Or what we call detuning. So a lot of you guys, if you buy a board from Satellite, a lot of times will ask you, do you want your board detuned? We basically detune from about here to here. So it's the contact points on a normal cambered board. Everyone knows what camber is? Camber is basically the flex. So cambered, reverse cambered, which is the big hot stuff right now. But basically, the idea is that your contact points being like really harsh up in here when you're doing like a 360, a 180, anything where you're sort of turning, this is your hook point because of the camber being arced. So if it's on the snow, it's going to snag on those four corners when it slides around. The idea behind reverse camber is that you've taken those contact points off the snow, and basically I can put my hand like this, and the board will swivel on the snow without really kicking up too much snow. With camber, you really have to engage the board, flex it in order for it to really do that. So there's a lot of arguments as to which way you can ride the board, who likes what. I would say definitely, overall, a reverse cambered board is definitely way better for jibbing, as far as just having fun, goofing around, but they're less stable. And the guys from Live Tech will probably argue the other way. But I know what most of the guys ride, and I think for the most part, most of the guys are riding just a regular cambered, board. Torsten, the guy who rides for DC, one super big air, all that stuff, rides a regular radial side cut, regular camber board. So it's pretty standard. There's a lot of different gimmicks and things that come out, but they are really fun. So reverse camber definitely has its place as far as making the board fun for different, attributes of the mount and stuff like that. So
are you trying to get like a 90-degree angle then too? So it's like a right angle.
Yeah, I mean, when we actually tune the edge, you're typically using either like a file guide. So this basically has, with these, which we sell these in the store a lot because they're pretty basic. Someone in here also had a little more advanced thing. It's kind of like this, where you lock the file piece into it, and then you can set the angles. And on this, you can set 95, 94, all the way down to 90. So you can get as exact as you want. I've been snowboarding for years, and I never really changed between 90 or 91. It doesn't. I've never been like, oh my god, it made such a huge difference. So
if you're not using a guide, like how do you know? Like,
well, typically, if you're not using a
guide.
guide, like I said, I was using my knuckles to guide this, but a diamond file is really only polishing the edge. It's the final step to maneuver this guy.
Yeah.
So actually filing the edge and trying to make it really sharp is another story. So typically you would use this diamond file at the very end of everything. So but what we were doing when we started doing like a base tune like that. So like if I was doing something where I was filing the edge and getting it flat, I might use this with like a piece of tape on the end to not scratch the base and get this sort of flat, because you're really just looking at trying to get that 90. And then I'd use this guide on here to grind this.
Okay.
So that's basically, yeah.
It may be too technical at this point.
It's alright, go
So
for
what
it.
if would you do all the same thing if you had a board with a magnet traction on it?
Well, the idea behind magnet traction is that A, you don't really need to tune it. You can actually let it detune on its own. And then they do make a magnet traction tool, which is basically just a shorter version of that. So because you have those divots in the edge, does everyone know what magnet traction is? It's basically a serrated edge, more like a bread knife, as opposed to what this would just be like one split cutting knife. So you have this sort of wavy serrated edge, and instead of having these contact points at the ends, you have them in multiple places on the board. And thus, when the board is reversed, all those points can touch on the snow and give you more contact points and less slippage. So that's the idea behind it. I've ridden pretty much every single reverse camber board. I can tell you that it's not my favorite, but I wouldn't say, don't buy it, it's the worst thing ever, or anything like that. Like, there's definitely a lot of guys that really like it, but for me personally, I still ride a regular cambered board with a regular radial side cut. Any other questions? What's a radial side cut? Radial side cut? Okay, so basically this board is shaped like an hourglass. So there's a radius here and a radius here. And you'll hear guys in like a lot of ski shops and stuff talk about tri-radial, bi-radial, like all these different things. It's all lots of bluff. I don't back really into it. A regular radius board does everything it needs to do, but a tri-radial board or a bi-radial board helps you get in and out of turns easier. So it's making it a little bit mellower going into the turn. So if it's like a first-time user and they're like, oh, I don't know, I'm having trouble with the board, I either say, just go to a reverse camber because you're not going to have that contact point, or look at some of the bi and tri-radial boards because it's basically helping you enter and exit a turn. However, if you learn how to turn the board and use the radius, you're actually going to be able to arc better turns and be able to consider it. So that's just personal preference. You can argue it for days, and I'm sure there's a bunch of engineering nerds out there. Last week. Yeah, so, but, I mean, like I said, if you look at some of the biggest pros in the world, they're all riding a radial side cut board. And almost every single board that comes out that has a model team on it, if you look it up and look look up the specs on it. Radial cycle, just centered, because they're riding both ways. They're riding all.
I don't think there's a single pro model or race camper.
I think Travis has one in line.
Oh, that's it.
Whether he actually rides it and is filming is a question. And that would be the same for